When a grieving millionaire hears an unfinished melody in his attic played by a housekeeper with secrets of her own, the music stirs more than just memories. But can two broken souls really compose something lasting together? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Camille Ross pulled her old station wagon into the long winding driveway of the Dunn estate. The morning sun glinted off the windows of the massive countryside home, making her squint as she parked in her usual spot behind the gardens. At 36, Camille had been cleaning houses for the wealthy for nearly a decade. But the Dunn property was by far the most impressive and the most mysterious. Another day, another dollar, she muttered to herself as she grabbed her cleaning supplies from the trunk. Martha, the head housekeeper, was waiting at the service entrance, checking her watch with a frown. "You're cutting it close, Camille. Mr. Dane is particular about schedules." Traffic was backed up on the highway, Camille explained, tucking a loose strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear. "Has anyone ever actually seen Mr. Dane? 3 months I've been working here, and not even a glimpse." Martha lowered her voice. "That's how he wants it. He values his privacy. And remember, the main level is your responsibility, nothing else, especially not the attic." "The forbidden zone," Camille joked. Martha didn't smile. "Just do your job and don't ask questions. That's why you're still here when the last 3 cleaners were let go." Camille nodded and headed inside. The house was beautiful. All hardwood floors, crystal chandeliers, and expensive furniture, but it felt empty. Not just unoccupied, but devoid of life. No family photos, no personal touches. It was like cleaning a museum display rather than a home. As she dusted the living room shelves, Camille hummed softly to herself, a habit her mother had passed down to her. Before bills and heartbreak had taken over her life, music had been Camille's passion. She'd played piano since she was 5, following in her mother's footsteps. But when her mother died 3 years ago after a long illness, leaving Camille with medical debts and a broken heart, the music had stopped. "Excuse me, Miss Ross." Camille turned to see George, the groundskeeper, standing in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but there's a storm headed our way. Martha says we're all leaving early today, Mr. Dunn's orders. He doesn't want anyone stranded here overnight." Camille glanced out the window. Dark clouds were already gathering on the horizon. "I haven't finished the library yet. Leave it for tomorrow. Everyone needs to be out in 30 minutes. Camille rushed to finish what she could, but as she was putting away her supplies, she noticed a water stain on the ceiling near the grand staircase. That hadn't been there yesterday. She looked around. The house was eerily quiet. The other staff had already left. She should leave, too. But that water stain bothered her. If there was a leak and it damaged anything expensive, she'd probably be blamed. "I'll just take a quick look," she told herself, climbing the stairs to the 2nd floor. The water stain seemed to be coming from somewhere above, possibly the attic. The 3rd floor hallway was dimly lit and clearly unused. At the end was a narrow staircase leading up to a door. The attic, she assumed. Against her better judgment, Camille climbed the stairs and tested the handle. To her surprise, it wasn't locked. The attic was vast and filled with dust motes dancing in the beams of light that filtered through small windows. Old furniture covered with sheets created ghostly shapes in the shadows. But what caught Camille's eye was in the center of the room. A large object covered with a faded sheet. She approached it slowly, pulled by curiosity. When she carefully lifted the corner of the sheet, her breath caught in her throat. A grand piano, beautiful despite the layer of dust covering its gleaming black surface. Without thinking, Camille pulled the sheet off completely and sat on the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys as memories flooded back, her mother guiding her small hands over the piano, teaching her a simple melody as they sat side by side. "Just a few notes," she whispered to herself. "No one will know." She pressed down gently, wincing at how out of tune the piano was. But still, the notes rang out in the silent attic. Slowly, her fingers remembered the melody her mother used to hum while folding laundry. Something soft, slightly melancholy, and unfinished, just like the memory itself. Lost in the moment, Camille didn't hear the footsteps on the stairs. She didn't notice the door opening wider. She was only aware of the music. Simple, aching, alive. When she finally stopped playing, the silence seemed heavier than before. That's when she felt it. The presence of someone watching. She turned sharply toward the door, but there was no one there, just an empty doorway and the faint sound of retreating footsteps, her heart pounding. Camille quickly covered the piano again and hurried downstairs. The storm was picking up outside, rain beginning to lash against the windows. She gathered her things and rushed to her car, wondering if she'd just imagined someone watching her. As she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something important. What Camille didn't know was that Grayson Dane, the reclusive owner of the house, had been standing in that doorway, and for the first time in 3 years, he'd felt something other than emptiness. Grayson Dane stood at his office window, watching the storm rage outside. At 42, he was at the height of his career, CEO of Dunn Designs, a luxury empire that had made him a fortune. But success had never felt so hollow. 3 years ago, his younger brother, Michael, had died in a car accident. They'd argued that morning, a stupid fight about the business, and Grayson had never gotten to apologize. The guilt and grief had changed him. He'd retreated from public life, buried himself in work, and eventually moved to this isolated estate where no one could see what he'd become. A ghost living in a moorslum of memories. The melody he'd heard in the attic earlier that day still echoed in his mind. It had been Michael's piano once. Grayson had covered it and forbidden anyone to touch it after the funeral. Yet hearing those hesitant notes had stirred something in him. A crack in the ice he'd built around himself. "Who is she?" he asked without turning around. His assistant, David, cleared his throat. "Camille Ross, been with the cleaning service for 3 months. Excellent references. No issues until today when she went where she shouldn't have. Fire her if that's what you want, sir." Grayson was silent for a long moment. "No," he finally said, "not yet." David seemed surprised but nodded. "As you wish. The revised contracts for the Milan project need your signature before tomorrow." Grayson turned back to his desk, burying himself in work until dawn, trying to forget the sound of that unfinished melody and the strange feeling it had awakened in him. The next morning, Camille arrived at work early, determined to make up for leaving things unfinished the day before. She was also nervous had someone seen her in the attic. Would today be her last day? Martha met her with the usual list of tasks. "Library first today. You'll need to give it extra attention since you missed it yesterday." No mention of the attic. Camille breathed a sigh of relief. The morning passed uneventfully. Camille was dusting the bookshelves in the library when she felt that same sensation. Someone watching. She turned to find a tall man standing in the doorway. He was striking rather than handsome, lean with sharp features and intense grey eyes. That seemed to cut right through her. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and he wore an expensive-looking suit that did nothing to hide the tension in his shoulders. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar, though Camille was certain they'd never met. "Mr. Dane," she gasped, immediately, lowering her eyes. So, this was the mysterious owner of the house. "You were in the attic yesterday," he said. His voice was deep, but quiet, as if he didn't use it often. There was no point denying it. "Yes, sir. I saw a water stain on the ceiling and went to check for leaks. I'm sorry for overstepping." "And the piano?" Camille's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "That was inexcusable. I understand if you want me to leave." Grayson studied her for a long moment. "What was that song?" The question caught her off guard. "Just something my mother used to hum while doing housework. It's not really a full song, just a melody." It sounded unfinished. "It is. My mother never wrote down the ending. She always said the best melodies don't have endings, just pauses." Something flashed in his eyes. Recognition perhaps, or pain. "Finish your work here," he said abruptly, then turned and left. Camille stood frozen, her heart racing. She hadn't been fired on the spot, which was surprising enough. But there had been something else in that brief interaction, something she couldn't quite name. The next day, Camille arrived to find a note with her usual list of duties. "Attic needs dusting." Piano needs polishing. 2 p.m. Martha raised an eyebrow when she saw it. Seems you've caught Mr. Dunt's attention. Be careful with that. What to p? You mean he hasn't let anyone touch that piano since his brother died? It was Michael's. At exactly 2 p.m., Camille nervously made her way to the attic. The sheet had been removed from the piano, and the windows were open, letting in fresh air and sunlight. She set to work carefully cleaning the dust from the beautiful instrument. As she polished the dark wood, she couldn't help running her fingers lightly over the keys now and then, not pressing down, just feeling their smooth coolness under her fingertips. Why did you stop playing? Camille jumped at the sound of Grayson's voice. He was standing in the doorway again, watching her with those intense grey eyes. I didn't mean to. Not today, he interrupted. Before you play like someone who once loved it. Why did you stop? Camille was stunned by the personal question. Life got complicated, she answered simply. After my mother died, there wasn't time for music anymore, just bills and survival. Grayson nodded slightly as if her answer confirmed something for him. Play something. It wasn't a request. It was somewhere between an order and a plea. I'm here to clean, Mr. Dane. Play something, he repeated. Softer this time. Please. Camille hesitated, then sat on the bench. Her fingers trembled slightly as she began to play. Not her mother's melody this time, but Chopin's Nocturne in F-flat major. She stumbled a few times, rusty from years without practice, but the music still flowed through her like a forgotten language suddenly remembered. When she finished, she didn't dare look up at him. Again tomorrow, Grayson said quietly. Same time. And then he was gone, leaving Camille alone with the piano, and a growing sense that something important was happening, something that went far beyond a cleaning job at a wealthy man's estate. As she drove home that evening, Camille couldn't stop thinking about the strange encounter. Why would a powerful, reclusive man like Grayson Dane want to hear her play? And why did she feel so drawn to him, despite the obvious barriers between them? What she didn't know was that back at the estate, Grayson had opened a sketchbook for the first time in 3 years. In the soft light of his study, his hand moved across the page, drawing the first tentative lines of a woman sitting at a piano, her expression lost in music. Something was awakening in both of them, something neither had felt in a very long time. Hope. Over the next 2 weeks, Camille's routine changed dramatically. Each afternoon at 2 p.m. she would climb the stairs to the attic and play the piano for an hour while Grayson Dane sat quietly in a chair by the window, sometimes with his eyes closed, sometimes watching her hands move across the keys. They rarely spoke during these sessions. Camille would play whatever came to mind, classical pieces she remembered, simple songs her mother had taught her, even fragments of melodies she made up on the spot. And Grayson would listen, his expression unreadable, but his presence constant. The staff had started to whisper. Martha pulled Camille aside one morning with concern in her eyes. Be careful, she warned. Whatever's happening between you and Mr. Dunn, it won't end well. Men like him don't cross those lines permanently. Nothing's happening, Camille insisted. I just play the piano for him, that's all. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Something was happening. Something subtle but powerful. In the quiet of the attic, surrounded by dust and memories, they were connecting in a way that defied explanation. Today, as Camille finished playing Debussy's Clair de Lune, she glanced over at Grayson. He was sitting with a sketchbook on his lap, his hand moving quickly across the page. You're drawing again, she said softly. He looked up, surprised, then closed the sketchbook. How did you know I used to draw? Your hands, Camille replied. They move like they're used to creating something. And I've seen your designs in magazines. Dunn is famous. Grayson set the sketchbook aside. I haven't drawn anything worth keeping in 3 years. Since your brother died, Camille said, then immediately regretted it. I'm sorry. Martha mentioned it once. I shouldn't have. It's all right. Grayson interrupted. Yes, since Michael died. He was the real artist in the family. I just had a good eye for business. That's not what the magazines say. They call you a visionary. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. They used to. Now they probably call me a recluse or a has-been. Why did you stop? Camille asked, turning fully on the piano bench to face him. Grayson was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. We argued the morning he died about the business, about the direction it was taking. He wanted to keep it small, authentic. I wanted to expand, become a luxury brand. He stormed out, drove too fast on a rainy road. Grayson's voice trailed off. The last thing I said to him was that he was holding us back. The pain in his words hung in the air between them. Camille felt an unexpected urge to reach out to him, to offer some comfort, but she stayed where she was. I stopped drawing because it reminded me of him, Grayson continued. And because I didn't deserve to create anything beautiful after what I'd done. That's not fair to your brother's memory, Camille said gently. Would he have wanted you to stop living because he couldn't? Grayson looked up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Why did you really stop playing, Camille? Was it just about money and time? The direct question caught her off guard. She looked down at her hands resting on the piano keys. After my mother died, I just couldn't feel the music anymore. She admitted she was the one who taught me to play. Every time I sat at a piano, all I could think about was how she wasn't there to listen. So, I stopped. It was easier than playing for no one because no one was listening, Grayson said softly. Camille nodded, surprised by how well he understood. I hear you, he said. The simple words carrying a weight that made her look up at him again. Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. The clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, breaking the spell. I should get back to my regular duties, Camille said, standing up quickly. Tomorrow? Grayson asked, and there was a note of uncertainty in his voice that hadn't been there before. Yes, Camille replied. Same time. As she headed downstairs, her heart was beating faster than usual. Something had shifted between them today. The careful distance they'd maintained was beginning to close, and that both thrilled and terrified her. The next day, Camille arrived at the estate to find the staff in a flutter of activity. What's going on? She asked Jenny, one of the kitchen helpers, who was rushing past with a tray of coffee. Mr. Dunt's brother-in-law is here. Jenny whispered excitedly. Richard Foster, he runs the business with Mr. Dane. Apparently, there's some big crisis that needed Mr. Dunt's immediate attention. Camille felt a twinge of disappointment. With important business visitors, their piano session would surely be cancelled. She went about her regular cleaning duties, trying not to think about the attic or the man who waited there each afternoon. As she was vacuuming the main hallway, voices drifted from Grayson's office, raised voices that were clearly in the middle of a heated argument. You can't keep hiding out here, Gray, a man's voice insisted. The board is getting restless. Competitors are circling. We need you back in New York. The company is doing fine without me there, Grayson replied, his voice cooler than the other man's. That's why I made you COO, Richard. It's not just about the business, Richard said, his tone softening slightly. It's about you. Elise is worried sick about her brother. We all are. It's been 3 years, Gray. Michael wouldn't have wanted this for you. Don't tell me what Michael would have wanted. Grayson snapped. Camille moved further down the hall, not wanting to eavesdrop any more than she already had. But as she worked, she couldn't help wondering about Grayson's life before grief had driven him into isolation. He must have been different once, more alive, less guarded. When 2 p.m. came, Camille hesitated. Should she go to the attic as usual, or would Grayson be too busy with his visitor? Finally, she decided to at least check. To her surprise, when she reached the attic, Grayson was already there, sitting at the piano himself, his fingers hovering over the keys without touching them. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said without looking up. I wasn't sure you'd be here, she replied, staying by the door. Your brother-in-law, Richard, has gone back to New York, Grayson interrupted. With nothing resolved as usual, Camille approached the piano slowly. He seems concerned about you. He's concerned about the business, Grayson corrected her. And my sister sent him to check that I hadn't completely lost my mind. He finally looked up at her. Maybe I have. Why would you think that? He gestured vaguely around the attic. Sitting up here every day listening to a housekeeper play my dead brother's piano instead of running my company. Sounds pretty crazy when you say it out loud. The words stung, even though Camille knew they weren't meant to hurt her. It was the first time Grayson had directly acknowledged the strangeness of their situation, the impropriety of it. Even if it's a problem, she said stiffly. Grayson stood up abruptly, running a hand through his hair in frustration. That's not what I meant. I'm not good at this, Camille. At talking, at explaining myself. You don't have to explain anything to me, Mr. Dunn. I work for you. If you want me to play the piano, I'll play it. If you don't, I won't. Grayson, he said, his eyes meeting hers. Please call me Grayson. At least up here. The request surprised her. It crossed another line in their undefined relationship. I'm not crazy, he continued softly. These hours listening to you play, they're the first time I felt anything real since Michael died. The first time I've wanted to draw, to create, the first time I felt alive. Camille didn't know how to respond to such raw honesty. Part of her wanted to run from the intensity of his gaze, from the weight of meaning in his words, but another part, a stronger part, wanted to stay. Play with me,